Okay, so let's dive into Monday, March 31st, 2025, and take a closer look at what Grok Trade is highlighting today.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, trying to get a grip on the markets and the economy, without drowning in all that financial jargon.
Yeah, right, exactly. So much going on.
So you share this with us so he could cut through the noise, right?
Totally. So we're going to break down what happened in the stock market today.
All right.
We'll dig into some of those, anxieties around the economy, and then we'll see what's going on with cryptocurrency,
Cool.
especially with gold having a bit of a moment, it seems.
Well, it's good. Let's do it.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about this whole gap down and clawback thing that Grok Trade is pointing out with the stock market.
Yeah, this is interesting. We saw this kind of like initial dip when trading started,
Yeah.
like a knee-jerk reaction almost. But then buyers stepped in
Okay.
and pushed those prices right back up throughout the day.
Wow.
It's kind of like the market took a breath,
Yeah.
realized it might have overreacted, and then just kind of like shrugged it off.
But is that a good sign? Like, does that mean things are actually pretty solid?
Well, it suggests there's some underlying strength.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's not the same story across the board. Different sectors are telling different stories.
Okay, so like, what are we seeing with the different indexes?
Right. So the Dow Jones,
Yeah.
that one really stood out today, closing with a gain of a full 1%.
Wow, 1%. That's pretty significant.
Yeah. And it's those big, like the blue chip companies, the established players that really drove that.
Interesting. So maybe investors are feeling a bit more cautious right now and sticking with those kind of like familiar names.
Yeah. Could be, looking for stability in uncertain times. Or maybe they just see continued value there.
Makes sense.
Now the S&P 500,
Yep.
it also had a pretty decent comeback, closing up 0.67%.
So that means like the broader market sentiment, overall kind of shifted to the positive as the day went on.
Yeah, exactly. But then you've got the NASDAQ.
The tech heavy one, right?
Yep. And that one, it stayed pretty much flat.
Huh. So while everything else was recovering, tech just kind of sat there?
Well, it barely budged, so it makes you wonder, right?
Yeah. Like, are investors feeling less confident about tech right now?
It's possible.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some sector-specific caution, especially after, tech has had such a run lately. Or maybe it's just some profit-taking, people cashing in on those gains.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
And then on the flip side, you've got the Russell 2000, which tracks those small-cap companies. And that one actually dipped by 0.5%.
Really?
Yeah. So like going in the opposite direction of those big indexes.
So is that a bad sign for the smaller companies?
Well, it could suggest that investors are feeling less optimistic about their growth potential right now.
Yeah.
So you put it all together, and it's kind of a mixed bag, right? You've got these intraday swings and then different sectors performing so differently. It really points to a market that's, still searching for its footing.
Trying to figure out which way to go.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the overall U.S. economy.
Sure.
One thing that Grok Trade keeps mentioning is this tariff uncertainty.
Right, yeah. That's definitely a big theme right now.
But why should we care about that? Like, how does that actually affect us?
Well, tariffs can act like an extra tax on goods,
Oh, okay.
So they can increase costs for businesses, which then often gets passed on to consumers.
So that means like higher prices for us.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Not good. And Grok Trade points out that everyone is waiting for this inflation data that's coming out later this week.
Okay.
And that's going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
Because it'll give us a clearer picture of how these tariffs might be affecting prices.
Right. So everyone will be watching those numbers really closely.
Absolutely. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the Federal Reserve reacts to that data, too. Because it could influence their decisions on interest rates and things like that.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So there's definitely a sense of anticipation in the air.
From what I'm reading, it seems like there's a bit of a debate going on, right? Like some economists are really worried that tariffs are going to drive inflation way up.
Right.
But then some traders aren't quite as concerned.
Yeah, exactly. And that difference in opinion just highlights how much uncertainty there is around this whole issue.
Right. So nobody really knows for sure what's going to happen.
It's hard to predict with complete certainty. Right?
Yeah.
But one thing we do know is that the VIX,
The what?
the VIX, that's the volatility index.
Oh, okay.
And that's basically a measure of, how much anxiety or fear there is in the market.
Yeah.
And Grok Trade describes it as being perkier lately.
Perkier.
Yeah, no, that's kind of a funny way to put it. But basically it means that the market is anticipating some potentially big news or, some significant shifts coming up.
So everybody's on edge.
Yeah, kind of.
All right, let's move on to crypto and precious metals. So Grok Trade is saying that Bitcoin showed this stubborn stability today.
Yeah, like it just kind of refused to budge.
So what's the takeaway there?
Well, it's interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because while the stock market was going up and down, Bitcoin just kind of held steady.
Huh.
So it could suggest that Bitcoin is, becoming a bit more mature as an asset class.
Yeah.
Maybe not as susceptible to those traditional market swings anymore.
Or maybe it's just seen so much volatility that it's become immune to it.
Well, maybe that's it. It's like it's already been through the ringer, so it's just kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Right.
But, the real story in this space today is gold.
Oh, yeah, gold had a big day, right?
It did. It broke above $3,100.
Wow. That's a pretty huge jump.
It is.
Yeah.
And gold is often seen as this safe haven asset.
Yeah.
When there's economic uncertainty, investors tend to flock to it.
Why is that?
Well, because they believe it will hold its value. They see it as a way to preserve their wealth when things are unpredictable.
Makes sense.
And today's price jump, along with the strong trading volume we saw and that overbought RSI, Relative Strength Index, it basically suggests strong upward momentum.
Okay.
And it's all pointing to, significant investor interest in that perceived safety of gold.
So it seems like gold is back in a big way.
Well, it certainly seems that way, and silver followed a similar path too.
So it's like a whole precious metals revival.
Right, exactly.
So the key takeaway here is this contrast, between Bitcoin, this digital asset leader being so stable, and then gold, this old school physical asset.
Right.
Having this big surge.
Yeah, it's almost like investors are turning back to tradition in times of uncertainty.
I guess that makes sense.
Right, it's like a flight to familiarity.
So it really makes you think, huh?
It does. It makes you wonder why, in a world that's becoming increasingly digital, are investors suddenly so drawn to a physical commodity like gold? What are those underlying concerns or expectations that might be driving this renewed interest in a traditional safe haven?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
It's something to ponder as you continue to navigate these markets.
Absolutely. Thanks for breaking it all down.
Of course.
So that's March 31st, 2025.
Yep.
Quite a day.
Yeah, it was.
Lots to think about.
Definitely.
Keep those eyes peeled, folks. See you next week.